It started with a knock on the door, a grieving couple, a missing grandson, and a case that seemed simple enough. But the deeper Nathan Reed looked, the stranger it got. The boy's trail led into London's hidden corners, secret nightclubs, fake names, people who lied with a smile. And then, the phone went dead. The house was empty, and something was terribly wrong. This isn't your typical missing person case. This is a story about deception so convincing it fooled a detective. And by the time he realized the truth, it was already far too late. Nathan Reed wasn't the kind of guy you'd expect to get tricked. He'd spent over 15 years on the force in London, rising through the ranks of the Metropolitan Police before finally calling it quits. Too much red tape, too many compromises. Now, in his early 40s, he worked as a private investigator by choice, not necessity. He lived just outside the city in a modest 2-bedroom walk-up and drove an old Ford Explorer with 220,000 miles on it. The kind of man who brewed his own coffee in a thermos every morning and didn't trust anything that came with a subscription. Nathan had a sharp eye for lies, a steady voice, and a sixth sense that had helped him out of more than a few bad situations. People hired him when things got weird, missing person stalkers, hushed up scandals, especially when they didn't want the cops involved. He wasn't cheap, but he was damn good. He knew when someone was hiding something, and he always trusted his gut. But when Roger and Eleanor Hartley rang his office phone one Thursday morning, he didn't feel alarm bells. They sounded like good, worried people. Their grandson Elliot had vanished in London, and the police weren't an option. Nathan had heard that line before, usually followed by the kind of secrets no one wanted on record. But something about them felt sincere, or at least sincere enough. And that's how Nathan walked straight into the one case that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Nathan met Roger and Eleanor Hartley in person that same afternoon. It was something he insisted on for every job, face-to-face, no exceptions. They lived in a quiet red brick terrace just off Holloway Road. Nothing about the place screamed danger, and the Hartleys didn't either. Roger was in his late 60s, a wiry man with steady blue eyes and a voice like gravel. Eleanor had a warmth to her, a gentle smile, kind hands, and the kind of composure you only earn from decades of weathering life's storms. Over tea and shortbread, they told Nathan about their grandson, Elliot Byrne, 19 years old. Moved into his first flat in Fitzrovia just a few months ago. Bright, artistic, a bit sensitive. According to them, Elliot had always been a sweet, quiet kid, never the rebellious type. But after his birthday in June, he started pulling away. First, he stopped answering their calls. Then, he quit his part-time job at a local cafe. No texts, no updates, nothing. It had been over a month since they'd last seen him. They feared something terrible had happened, maybe drugs, maybe worse. But they were also clear calling the police wasn't an option. Not unless they absolutely had to. Roger explained that Elliot had recently learned some traumatic details about how his parents had died. A hit and run the driver never caught. He'd taken it hard. "If he's spiraling," Eleanor said softly, "we don't want him punished for it. We want him safe." That's when they handed Nathan a small folder. Elliot's photo, his old address, and a list of contacts, including the coffee shop he worked at. Nathan asked the usual questions. Had he ever run away before? Had he fought with anyone? Any signs of depression? The answers were vague, but convincing. They seemed honest, especially Eleanor, who held back tears while recounting the night Elliot asked about the accident. It had all the marks of a simple missing persons case with an emotional twist. The kind that usually ended with a reunion, some counseling, and a few promises never to drift again. Nathan took the folder, finished his tea, and accepted the job. The Hartleys thanked him over and over. But as Nathan walked back to his truck, something didn't sit quite right. It wasn't anything they said, at least not yet. It was more the way they said it. Too polished, too prepared. Still, he chalked it up to grief. People in pain rehearsed their stories. They wanted to be understood. And Nathan wanted to believe them. That was his first mistake. Nathan's first stop was Elliot's old job, a small cafe on a side street in Fitzrovia, with plants in the windows and chalkboard menus that changed daily. It was early evening when he arrived, the place still buzzing with after-work regulars sipping espresso and checking their phones. He ordered a coffee, showed Elliot's photo to the girl behind the counter, and asked if she knew him. She gave it a quick glance and shook her head, but then paused. "Hang on," she said, and disappeared into the back. A minute later, she returned with another barista, a curly-haired brunette in her mid-20s who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her name was Lena, and the moment she saw Elliot's picture, she sat down across from Nathan without being asked. "Oh yeah," she said. "I knew him. He was something else." Lena's version of Elliot didn't quite match the one Nathan had heard about over tea and shortbread. According to her, Elliot wasn't some shy, artsy teen quietly falling apart over grief. He was electric, funny, flirtatious, and a little bit reckless. He loved staying out late sometimes, showing up to early shifts, still buzzing from the night before. He was a good guy, she said, but he lived like he was chasing something, or maybe running from it. Nathan took notes, asked about his last few weeks at the cafe. Lena said Elliot had quit nearly 2 months earlier, well before he went missing. He left on good terms, no drama. Said he was moving on to something more exciting. She didn't know where. Maybe a nightclub gig, maybe something freelance. "You know," she added with a knowing glance, "the kind of stuff you don't put on a resume." She gave Nathan the name of a bar Elliot had talked about a lot. The Hollow, a semi-secret spot in Soho that prided itself on exclusivity. No website, no phone number, no walk-ins unless you knew someone or paid a steep cover. Elliot had once described it as half church, half rave, which didn't make much sense until Nathan got there. The Hollow opened at 9 p.m., so he killed time before returning. When he arrived, the bouncer gave him a once-over and quoted a $25 entry fee. Nathan flashed a business card, thick, embossed with just his name and number. No logo. Just enough to suggest you didn't want to be on his bad side. The bouncer didn't budge. Nathan paid. Inside, the air smelled like smoked gin and expensive perfume. Lights pulsed low over leather booths. The music was hypnotic, more vibration than melody. Nathan stayed close to the bar, sipping a beer he didn't want, asking subtle questions. He showed Elliot's photo around. Some people nodded. A few clammed up. One bartender froze for just half a second too long before saying, "Never seen him," and disappearing into the back. Eventually, the manager came out, a tall woman named Shea, dressed in black from boots to eyeliner. Nathan introduced himself. She hesitated, then admitted she knew Elliot. "He was here a lot," she said. "Sweet. Maybe too sweet for this place. Always said hi to everyone. Always tipped." But something changed. A few weeks back, Elliot had shown up looking wrecked. Dark circles under his eyes, skittish, distant. He told one of the bartenders he was waiting for someone. Didn't drink, didn't dance. Just sat at the bar checking his phone and tapping his foot like he couldn't wait to leave. Then he muttered something like, "You might not see me around for a while," and vanished into the night. Shea also mentioned that someone else had come by recently asking about Elliot. A man in his 40s, well-dressed, angry. When Shea asked who he was, he got cagey and stormed off after security got involved. "I thought you might be him at first," she said. Nathan's instincts bristled. Two people looking for the same kid, both avoiding police, both hiding something. It was getting murkier by the hour. But Shea did offer one more lead. Someone Elliot was close to, a much older man who used to meet him after hours and lived up in Camden. She didn't have a name, just a street, Pratt Street, near St. Martin's Gardens. Nathan thanked her and left. He stood outside the Hollow, the night warm and too quiet, feeling something shift. This wasn't just a missing kid anymore. This was a life unraveling in slow motion, and he was starting to feel like he'd stepped into something far darker than he'd expected. The next morning, Nathan drove up to Camden with a strange tightness in his chest. It wasn't anxiety, not exactly, more like the feeling you get when a storm's coming and you can't see the clouds yet. Pratt Street was a mix of old row houses and trendy Airbnbs, the kind of place where people with money pretended to slum it for authenticity. He found a parking spot across from the address Shay had given him, a 3-story Victorian that had seen better decades. White paint peeling from the trim, rust along the railing, the garden overgrown like it hadn't been tended all summer. He waited in the truck for hours. From time to time, someone would walk past the house, a cyclist, a mom with a stroller, a man dragging a suitcase, but no one went in or out. At around 4:30 p.m., just when Nathan began to second-guess himself, the front door opened. A young man stepped out in a baseball cap and sunglasses. He was tall and wiry, moving quickly like he didn't want to be seen. Even with the shades, Nathan recognized him instantly. The bleached hair, the mouth, the posture. It was Elliot. But he didn't use that name when he picked up his coffee at the shop across the street. "Order for Sean," he'd said, voice low. Nathan followed him at a distance down Camden High Street. Elliot walked like someone trying not to look rushed, but couldn't help it. He checked over his shoulder once, casually. Nathan stayed back half a block, weaving through foot traffic, slipping between a group of teenagers and a man walking 2 large dogs. When Elliot turned onto Pratt again, this time from the opposite direction, Nathan kept to the other side of the street. He watched as the young man walked up the steps of the same old house and rang the bell. An older man answered. Mid to late 40s, well-groomed, dressed in a crisp navy shirt and slacks, like he was just getting home from a meeting. The two exchanged a kiss. Nathan noted the detail. It wasn't sexual, but intimate, familiar. This was the boyfriend Shay had mentioned. The door closed behind them, and Nathan went back to the truck. That evening, he called the Hartleys. He told them he'd found Elliot and that the boy seemed safe, but added that the situation might be sensitive. "He's staying with someone," Nathan explained, an older man. "You'll need to approach this carefully." There was a pause on the other end, followed by Roger's voice. "Thank you. That's more than we expected. Just, can you keep watch for one more day?" "We want to talk things over before we reach out," Nathan agreed. An extra day meant extra pay. And besides, something still didn't feel right. So he parked a few houses down from Elliot's and settled in for a long night. He didn't sleep. The street was mostly quiet, save for the occasional bus or passing drunk. At 1:40 a.m., a fox trotted across the road, its eyes glowing in Nathan's headlights, before it disappeared into the hedges. At 3:00 a.m., the porch light at Elliot's place flicked on, then off. No one came out. Nathan logged every movement, every flicker of activity. Nothing looked threatening. Nothing seemed urgent. But then, morning came. By 10 a.m., Elliot still hadn't left. Nathan was about to call Roger and Eleanor when he realized his calls weren't going through. Just a robotic voice. "The number you've dialed is not currently available." He tried Eleanor's phone, same thing. Texts went undelivered. His gut started to knot. He gave it 15 minutes, then 30, then another hour. Still nothing. At noon, he gave up and drove to the Hartley's house. It was all wrong the moment he turned onto their street. The blinds were drawn. The walkway was swept clean, as if prepped for a showing. He rang the doorbell, but it wasn't Roger or Eleanor who answered. It was a woman in her 30s, with short auburn hair and a confused smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. Nathan explained who he was, that he'd met the homeowners just days ago. The woman blinked, then laughed awkwardly. "You mean the Harts?" "I'm just house-sitting while they're away. They left for Mallorca this morning." Mallorca? He'd spoken to Roger less than 18 hours ago. Something was unraveling fast, and Nathan felt it in his bones. The woman couldn't provide much more. She didn't know where they went, didn't have a contact number, just a few instructions and a key under the mat. Nathan left, feeling like the sidewalk had shifted under his feet. Back in the truck, he stared at his notebook. Names, numbers, faces, lies. He didn't know who Roger and Eleanor really were, but one thing was now certain: They weren't Elliot's grandparents. And whatever they wanted from him, it wasn't to bring the boy home. Nathan didn't drive straight back to Camden. He pulled into a side lot behind a row of shops, killed the engine, and sat for a moment gripping the steering wheel with both hands. Everything about the Hartleys had been a performance. From the soft-spoken concern to the tea and biscuits, it was all an act staged to disarm him. The realization made his stomach turn. They'd fed him just enough truth to hook him, then used his skills to track Elliot down. But for what? He couldn't answer that yet, and he wasn't ready to involve the police, not until he understood what exactly he was dealing with. So he went back to Pratt Street, parked in the same spot as the day before, and resumed his quiet vigil. The house was still. No one came or went. The curtains in the second-story bedroom remained drawn. Around noon, a delivery guy showed up with groceries, handed them off to someone who cracked the door only a sliver. It was Elliot. Nathan caught a glimpse of his bleached hair and the outline of a hoodie. The interaction was short, polite, normal. But Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He kept watching. The sun dipped behind the rooftops and shadows stretched across the street. Around 8:00 p.m., the porch light flickered on. Nathan sipped from a lukewarm gas station coffee and adjusted in his seat. Every instinct told him something was coming, he just didn't know from which direction. At 9:47 p.m., the front door opened again. This time, the older man Marcus Nathan presumed stepped out onto the stoop for a cigarette. He looked relaxed, casual, like a man who had no idea anyone was watching. Nathan snapped a few photos from his seat, zoomed in on Marcus's face. If anything went south, he'd need proof identities, timelines, something solid. The man flicked his cigarette, went back inside, and the door shut behind him. That night, Nathan stayed longer. He reclined the seat, cracked the window, and kept one eye on the house while pretending to doze. But sleep never came. His mind kept cycling through questions. Who were Roger and Eleanor really? Why the urgency? Why vanish so cleanly right after he confirmed Elliot's location? By morning, the coffee shops on the corner were opening up. People started filing past with paper cups and folded newspapers. Nathan grabbed a bacon roll from a cart, sat behind the wheel, and waited until the clock hit noon. That's when he made a decision he had to warn Elliot. He didn't care how awkward it might be. He didn't care if the kids slammed the door in his face. Whatever was coming, Elliot had the right to know. Nathan stepped out of the truck, crossed the street, and walked up the path. The porch creaked under his boots. He rang the bell. That's when things went wrong. The sound echoed unnaturally loud. He waited. No answer. He knocked nothing. The door, he noticed, wasn't fully latched. A sliver of space sat between it and the frame. Nathan hesitated. Then he pushed. The door swung open. Nathan didn't like pushing open doors that weren't his to open. It went against everything drilled into him during his time with the Met. Respect the threshold, unless there's a warrant or a scream. But something about the way the latch hung loose, like it had been closed in a hurry and not quite shut, made his skin crawl. He stepped inside, slowly announcing himself. Elliot Marcus. It's Nathan Reed. I was hired by someone asking about you. His voice echoed through the entryway. No reply. The house smelled wrong. Not rotting food or mold, something sharper. Chemical. Almost sterile, like someone had cleaned too fast, too late. He moved through the hallway, noting the tidy furniture, the unopened mail stacked neatly on a console table, the faint hum of a fridge down the hall. Everything was still. Too still. The living room was empty. So was the kitchen. No signs of struggle. No signs of life. He climbed the stairs one creaking step at a time, the banister cool beneath his palm. At the top 3 doors, one ajar. He pushed it gently. The master bedroom looked like it had been frozen mid-morning. The comforter rumpled one shoe on the floor. The curtains half drawn. But the thing that stopped him cold What sucked the air from the room was the blood. A wide, dark spatter across the mattress up the wall pooled beneath the edge of the bed. Two figures lay there unmoving. Nathan couldn't move, couldn't speak. For a few seconds, the world simply stalled. Then his hand reached for his phone almost on instinct. He dialed 999. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Rehearsed an anchor Nathan clung to as he stumbled through the address and described what he'd found. 2 victims, he said. Male. Both appeared deceased. No pulse. Severe trauma. No visible weapon in the room. No sign of forced entry. His voice sounded mechanical, as if someone else were speaking through him. She told him to stay on the line. He didn't. He ended the call and stood there for a moment longer staring at the bed. At what had been Elliot and Marcus. He stepped back into the hallway, every breath tight in his chest. He wasn't a cop anymore. He didn't have a badge to flash or backup to call. He was just a guy with a business card and a sick feeling in his gut, and right now, he was standing in the middle of a crime scene. He walked back down the stairs, slowly gripping the railing, like it might suddenly vanish from under him. When he opened the front door again, the sun was still shining. A couple passed by on the sidewalk laughing about something that now felt violently out of place. By the time the first squad car arrived, Nathan had already taken a seat on the porch steps. Hands folded, phone set, face down beside him. The officers were the young, early 30s, fresh-pressed uniforms, cautious eyes. They asked for ID, asked him to stay put. Then the uniforms went inside. A beat later, one of them came right back out, pale and tight-lipped, and radioed for CID. The detectives took longer, but they were faster once they arrived. Nathan knew the routine. He gave his statement twice, once to the sergeant, then again to a plainclothes detective who clearly outranked the rest. Her name was DCI Renner. She had the look of someone who'd long ago stopped being surprised by how ugly people could get. She listened without interrupting, jotting only the occasional note. Nathan told her everything from the moment the Hartleys walked into his office to the second he pushed open that unlocked door. By the time forensics arrived, the street had been cordoned off. Neighbors were gathering, and Nathan's throat was dry from repeating the same story. He didn't have much more to offer, just fragments. A fake couple with fake names, a missing teen, an older man whose identity was barely known. He showed them the photos he'd taken the night before. He handed over the notebook with every detail he'd recorded. He told them about the strange chemical smell, about the way the bodies looked like they'd been attacked in their sleep. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood elsewhere in the house, no signs of theft. It didn't feel random. It felt surgical. Intentional. Later, as the coroner's van rolled away with the 2 zipped body bags, Nathan leaned against his truck and tried to make sense of it all. Elliot had seemed safe just 24 hours ago. Alive, functional. Maybe not at peace, but not in danger either. So, what happened? He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he wrote everything he could remember, every word the Hartleys had said, every pause in their conversation, every look that now felt off in hindsight. He searched online for obituaries, family records, anything that might link Roger and Eleanor Hartley to Elliot Byrne. Nothing came up. No matching relatives, no property records, no travel records to Mallorca. It was like they'd never existed. The next morning, he called DCI Renner to check in. She confirmed what he suspected. The woman who'd answered the door at the Hartleys' house wasn't lying. She really was a house sitter. The couple had offered her $5,000 in cash to clear out for a few days. They even left her written instructions and a burner phone for updates. They had taken care of everything, including cleaning supplies, a fake ID to show neighbors, even a story to explain the sudden absence. She had no idea she'd been helping stage a murder plot. When the police questioned her, she broke down and handed over the entire stash, including $10,000 in unmarked notes wrapped in plastic. It was a professional setup. But who were they? Nathan didn't know it yet, but the answer would never come clean. And the question of who the Hartleys really were that would stick with him for the rest of his life. Over the next few weeks, the investigation unraveled in fits and starts. Nathan stayed in contact with DCI Renner, though he could tell she was increasingly boxed in by something bigger than the case itself. The crime scene yielded very little no fingerprints besides the victims, and Nathan's no murder weapon, no usable DNA. Whoever had done it had either worn gloves, wiped everything down, or had never left a trace to begin with. It was surgical precise, less like a crime of passion, and more like a contract hit. But if that was the case, why the theatrics? Why the performance of caring grandparents? Why go through the trouble of hiring a private investigator instead of just tracking Elliot down themselves? The answer came from an unexpected direction. One morning, Nathan received a message from a blocked number. No name, just a line of text. Look into Marcus Fielding. Ask about Chambers. Ask about the wife. He stared at the screen for a long time before calling Renner. She didn't answer, so he dug into the name himself. Fielding hadn't been just some older boyfriend Elliot had taken up with. He was a senior barrister, high-profile, politically connected, and married. His wife, Claire Fielding, sat on the board of several charitable foundations. They had a house in Chelsea, 2 kids in private school, and a presence in the kind of social circles where image was everything. The more Nathan read, the more the picture sharpened. Elliot wasn't just a troubled young man who got involved with the wrong crowd. He was a liability. And Marcus had secrets. Rumors, as Nathan quickly discovered, had been circulating in legal circles for years. Whispers about late nights with male escorts, an internal chamber complaint that quietly vanished, a private settlement. No names, no charges, but the framework was there. And if someone were determined to keep Marcus's double life from ever reaching the surface, Elliot would have been the loose thread that needed cutting. But here's the part that chilled Nathan the most. The deeper he dug, the more it looked like Marcus hadn't ordered the hit. At least, not directly. He'd cared about Elliot. That much came through in texts the tech team recovered from a hidden burner phone found inside a dresser drawer. There were dozens of messages. Loving, emotional, protective. Some clearly from Elliot. Some from Marcus. The last few took a darker turn. Marcus worried they were being followed, that someone had made a threat. And then they stopped. Whatever was going on, Marcus might have been just as much a target as Elliot. Nathan relayed what he found to Renner, but her tone had shifted. Cold. Measured. Thanks, she said. We're following leads. I'll let you know if we need further statements. It was the kind of brush-off Nathan had used himself, back when a case had wandered into the political zone and he'd been told to back off. He didn't push it. But something else still nagged him. The woman, the one posing as Eleanor Hartley, had never been caught. The composite sketch built off Nathan's memory, and the house-sitter's description turned up no matches in any national or Interpol databases. She'd vanished completely. So had her partner. No CCTV footage of them leaving the country. No financial trails. No hotel records. It was like they'd walked through the world wearing someone else's skin, and when they were done, shed it and disappeared. One small break came when a name popped up: Isabel Trent. A name linked to a fake passport connected to a different investigation years ago. A suspected fixer. A professional ghost. The kind of person who could arrange clean identities, untraceable travel, and entire false backstories. The file was thin, but it confirmed something Nathan already suspected. This wasn't just personal. It was orchestrated. And it didn't take long before the story began, quietly collapsing under the weight of legal pressure. The Fielding family filed an injunction with the High Court to prevent Marcus's name from being linked to Elliot's in public records. The Bar Association issued a carefully worded statement expressing deep regret over the tragic loss of one of their own, but omitted any reference to his companion. News outlets starved for a headline ran a few pieces in the back pages before moving on to the next scandal. Elliot Burns' name faded like dust. Nathan kept digging, but even he had to admit that what remained wasn't justice. It was wreckage. 2 people were dead. The killers had vanished. And the institutions that should have cared had chosen silence. For him, this wasn't just about a job gone wrong. It was about being used. About realizing too late that the people who smiled at you over tea might be sharpening the knife the whole time. He thought about Elliot often, not the victim on the bed, but the kid in the photo full of light and confidence, unaware that he was already marked. Some cases end with answers. This one ended with a locked file, a cold trail, and a bitter taste Nathan couldn't get rid of. Months passed, but the case never left Nathan. Not in the usual way, the way a bad case sits on your desk too long, or a missed clue haunts your pride. No, this one dug deeper. It had tricked him, not just as a detective, but as a person. He wasn't naive. He knew people lied. He knew how masks worked, how grief could be faked, and how stories could be shaped into weapons. But he'd trusted the Hartleys, if that was even their real name, because they looked like the kind of people who needed help. And they'd used that trust like a scalpel. Nathan kept Elliot's case file in a separate drawer from the others, locked. No labels. He didn't pull it out often. When he did, it wasn't to analyze the evidence he'd done that 100 times. It was to remember the look on Elliot's face in that photo his grandparents had given him. Young, hopeful, smiling at something just off camera. That was the Elliot Nathan wanted to hold on to. Not the boy in the bedroom. Not the name buried beneath headlines that never made the front page. He never took another case like it. Missing persons still came through his door. Some were just runaway teens. Some were darker. But he was different now. Slower to trust. Sharper around the edges. There was no justice for Elliot Byron. Only silence and memory. And for Nathan, that was the hardest part. Because he didn't just fail to save a life. He'd helped the wrong people find it first. Elliot Byron's story didn't close with justice. It faded with silence. And for Nathan Reed, the quiet was louder than anything he'd ever heard. Sometimes the worst part isn't that the monsters got away. It's that they wore faces you were taught to trust. For 15 years, Ray Mercer was the kind of cop who didn't need a badge to prove he was sharp. He'd started in homicide, but early on transferred to financial crimes where he found his true calling, not chasing suspects, but chasing numbers. Because numbers, unlike people, don't lie. They don't change their story. They don't crack under pressure. Over time, Ray built a reputation in New York's financial crime division for unraveling even the most tangled webs of fraud and embezzlement. But when he retired, he didn't leave the hunt behind. He set up a modest private investigator's office in Albany, trading bureaucratic red tape for autonomy. No more politics. No more being told to drop a case because someone upstairs was uncomfortable. Now, he could pick the puzzles he wanted to solve. The odd missing person here, the occasional background check, but it was the financial work that still thrilled him. And when a call came in from an old contact, someone with a job tied to a billion-dollar corporation, Ray couldn't help himself. He grabbed a fresh legal pad, poured a black coffee, and leaned in. Ray didn't expect much from the call when it first came in, just another voice from his past, probably needing help with a jealous spouse or a runaway teen. But the moment he heard Mark Ellison's name, he sat up straighter. Mark was an old contact from his days on the force, a defense attorney with a knack for towing the legal line and occasionally dancing over it. But this time, Mark wasn't calling about a messy divorce or an alibi gone sideways. He had something bigger, much bigger. A corporate whale. Mark said a client of his Norhurst Global Capital suspected internal fraud, the kind that leaked millions without a trace. On paper, the case was complicated accounts, scattered across international jurisdictions, a mountain of encrypted spreadsheets, shell companies with names that meant nothing. But to Ray, it was an invitation to do what he loved, untangle lies buried in numbers. The challenge ignited something old in him, part instinct, part obsession. He agreed before he even heard the fee. And when Mark told him what the company was offering, Ray nearly laughed. They were paying him like they already knew this wasn't going to be clean or simple. Within a week, he had flown to Norhurst's Manhattan headquarters. The building itself screamed power glass, steel, polished stone, but Ray knew better. The fancier the lobby, the dirtier the books. He was about to find out just how deep the rot went, and if he was the only one willing to dig. Ray wasn't new to corporate finance. He'd spent enough time inside glossy boardrooms and sterile server rooms to know that behind every clean balance sheet was a mess someone didn't want to talk about. But Norhurst Global Capital was on a different level. The company's financial structure was a labyrinth of offshore subsidiaries, regional shell operations, and countless vendor accounts that stretched across Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. It was like someone had built a machine specifically designed to hide things. Ray holed up in a nondescript office on the 19th floor, surrounded by 6 monitors, 3 legal pads, and a never-ending stream of espresso shots. For days, he barely looked up. He buried himself in quarterly reports, invoice trails, and database extracts, his fingers tapping out a silent rhythm of suspicion. At first, it was just a few numbers that didn't sit right, minor discrepancies, a vendor invoice with a slight mismatch, a bank wire labeled urgent operational fees that didn't match any known project. But Ray didn't dismiss them. He followed the inconsistencies like breadcrumbs. One wire led to a shell company registered in Malta. Another had been routed through a defunct account in the Cayman Islands. The deeper he dug, the more the anomalies started forming a pattern, small, deliberate leaks that added up to millions over time. Someone wasn't just skimming. They were siphoning funds with surgical precision. To the untrained eye, the irregularities might have passed for clerical errors or currency conversion mishaps. But Ray had seen it all before, the way embezzlers layered transfers through dead-end LLCs, timed them to hit on public holidays, and used generic terms like consulting fees or international coordination disbursements to blur the paper trail. It was textbook, but polished. Smart. Someone inside Norhurst knew exactly how to hide in plain sight. Still, there was one thing even the most seasoned white-collar criminal couldn't hide from rhythm. Money has a beat. It moves in cycles, and when that cycle breaks, when a $2.3 million transfer lands at 3:14 a.m. in a tax haven, it tells you something. Ray started mapping the transfers out like music notation. Dissonance always stood out, and what he saw now was a full-blown symphony of deceit. But knowing money was missing wasn't enough. Ray needed names. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone high enough to sign off, but careful enough not to leave fingerprints. And based on the transfer approvals and internal timestamps, he had a feeling that person worked in a very shiny office with a very nice view. Ray didn't want to jump to conclusions. He'd made a career out of letting the numbers talk before the people did. But the deeper he traced the siphoned cash, the closer the trail curved toward the man at the top. Graham Vexler, Norhurst's chief financial officer. Vexler was polished, well-spoken, and carried the quiet self-assurance of someone who'd never had to explain himself to anyone who mattered. His office sat at the northeast corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Midtown Manhattan like a throne atop a kingdom of spreadsheets. Ray had interviewed dozens of white-collar execs over the years, and they all had one thing in common. They were great actors. Ray scheduled the interview under the guise of a routine financial review. Vexler greeted him with a firm handshake and a practiced smile, gesturing to an Eames chair across from his desk. Everything about the man screamed control, from the precisely knotted Windsor tie to the untouched cappuccino, resting on a coaster with Norhurst's logo embossed in gold. Ray kept the conversation light, at first asking about quarterly adjustments, international accounts, and audit compliance. Vexler answered smoothly, as if reading from a script. Then Ray pivoted. He brought up a specific $2.3 million transfer that had raised a red flag, a payment routed through a dormant intermediary in Cyprus, time-stamped at 3:14 a.m. He asked who had authorized it. Vexler paused, blinked once, and said he couldn't recall. Might have been someone in his department. He didn't personally sign off on every overseas transaction. Ray nodded politely, but his internal alarm was screaming. A CFO forgetting a multi-million-dollar transfer was like a surgeon forgetting a scalpel inside a patient. It didn't happen. Not unless someone had something to hide. Ray spent the next 2 days interviewing members of the finance team. Danielle Price, a mid-level manager who handled global accounts, mentioned a strategy meeting that took place just days before the transfer. According to her, Vexler had not only been present, but had led the discussion. When Ray mentioned this to Vexler later, he claimed he hadn't attended. That was the first direct contradiction. Then came Mira Chen, a senior assistant who'd been with the company for years. Mira looked nervous the moment she sat down. She fidgeted with her necklace and avoided eye contact. When Ray brought up the transfer, she said she didn't remember the specifics, but recalled Vexler instructing her to expedite a high-priority wire around that time. He said it was time-sensitive, she mumbled. Told us to push it through. Ray left that meeting with his suspicions no longer theoretical. 2 of Vexler's closest colleagues had just contradicted him without even realizing it. The cracks were showing. Ray knew from experience, the more polished the front, the more rot underneath. He walked out of the building that day not just with questions, but with a target. And as he reached for his tape recorder in the car, he knew he was getting too close for someone's comfort. Ray's car was parked a block away from the Norhurst Tower, tucked into a quiet lot behind a row of shuttered storefronts and a dry cleaner that hadn't changed its signage since the 90s. It was the kind of place where no one paid much attention, a habit Ray had kept from his days in homicide. As he slid behind the wheel, the city buzzed in the background, muted by the steel frame of his aging sedan. He pulled out his old tape recorder, the same model he'd used on stakeouts and crime scenes back in the day, and hit the red button. His voice, a little rough from too much coffee and too little sleep, filled the interior of the car as he spoke aloud to himself, a habit he'd picked up long ago to help process timelines and connections. He laid it out slowly. The timeline of the wire transfer. The meeting that supposedly didn't happen. The look in Mira Chen's eyes. The hesitation in Vexler's voice. He'd seen it all before. Someone was trying to make this look like clerical noise, but the story was unraveling stitch by stitch. He's hiding something, Ray said into the recorder. I think Vexler's orchestrating this, or at least signing off on it. Then it happened. A loud crack shattered the air like a baseball bat against cement. The driver's side window exploded inward, showering Ray with tempered glass. He dropped the recorder instinctively and threw himself sideways, but not fast enough. The first bullet ripped into the dashboard just above his knees. The second tore through the upper sleeve of his jacket, grazing his left shoulder. The third embedded itself in the passenger seat, stuffing, erupting like snow from the impact. The fourth ray never saw it coming. It hit just beneath his cheekbone, shattering his jaw and blasting out near his left ear. The pain was instantaneous and consuming. Hot blood and broken enamel flooded his mouth as everything tilted violently. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His vision blurred, then blackened. The last sound he heard was the low hiss of the tape still running. When Ray woke up, the world had changed. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed above him. A monitor beeped steadily at his side. Pain throbbed in waves from his shoulder to his jaw, every movement sparking a jolt like electricity in broken glass. His mouth was wired shut. A nurse hovered nearby, her voice calm but strained, explaining what had happened. He'd been shot multiple times and barely made it. Emergency surgery had stabilized him. The shoulder graze was manageable, but the bullet to the face had done catastrophic damage. His jaw was fractured in 2 places, several teeth were gone, and they'd wired his mouth shut to allow the bone to heal. He couldn't speak, couldn't ask questions. When they handed him a notepad and pen, his hand trembled as he wrote the only thing that mattered. Who did this? No one had answers. But Ray already knew. He had gotten too close, and someone had decided to make sure he never got any closer. Recovery didn't feel like healing. It felt like punishment. Ray spent the first few days in the ICU, drifting in and out of consciousness, swimming through a haze of morphine and fluorescent light. Every breath sent a jolt through his wired jaw, and when he tried to speak, only muffled groans came out. A bullet had obliterated half his lower teeth and cracked his mandible in 2 places. The surgeons had done their best, wiring his jaw shut with metal loops and stitching torn muscle. His shoulder had been bandaged and stitched, and though it burned constantly, it was the least of his worries. The mouth, that's where the pain lived. Each day blurred into the next. Meals came through a straw, usually a gritty mixture of broth and protein shakes that tasted like cardboard soaked in salt. The nurses were kind but distant. Ray was a chart to them, not a man who'd been shot in broad daylight for asking too many questions. The hospital staff called it a miracle he was alive. Ray called it unfinished business. Physical therapy started early. A therapist named Teresa Quinn visited daily, guiding him through jaw stretches meant to keep the muscles from locking up. Most days, Ray could barely move his mouth at all. Teresa never seemed discouraged. She would sit by the bed, adjust his pillow, and talk through each motion, encouraging him even when sweat poured down his face from the pain. He hated those sessions, but he hated the thought of staying broken even more. When he was finally moved out of the ICU, the room got quieter, but his mind got louder. The nightmares came first. The hiss of the tape recorder, the crack of glass, the sudden flash of pain. He'd jolt upright, eyes wide, heart pounding, only to be met by silence and sterile white walls. The hospital tried to manage his trauma with pills, but no amount of sedatives could quiet the feeling that he was still being watched. He began checking the hallway window, expecting to see a shadow, a muzzle, a man who had returned to finish what he'd started. One day, Detective Calderon from NYPD came by. He stood at Ray's bedside with a folder tucked under one arm, his face carved from a blend of sympathy and resignation. They'd reviewed the footage from across the street, a grainy clip of a hooded figure firing into Ray's car, then running off. No license plate, no fingerprints, no ID. They'd found 9mm casings, but nothing else. Calderon said it looked like a job done by an amateur, sloppy, rushed. Cheap. Ray wrote on his notepad, "You think someone paid him?" Calderon read it, hesitated, and then said, "If I were a betting man, I'd say yes. But proving it, that's a whole different war." Ray knew. The shooter was a pawn, but pawns don't act alone. Someone higher up had made a call. Someone with enough to lose and enough money to make it all disappear. Ray stayed in the hospital for nearly 8 weeks, but it felt longer, like time had slowed to punish him for surviving. Even as his body began to mend, the psychological damage lingered like a shadow that never left the room. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw glass shatter and felt the burning trail of the bullet tearing through his face. The nurses adjusted his medication, upped his sedatives, and spoke to him with careful voices as though afraid he might break again. But it wasn't their concern that haunted him. It was the silence from the outside world. Aside from a few close friends and his sister, no one visited. The team from Norhurst never called. No polite inquiries. No apologies. Nothing. It was like he'd been erased. Detective Calderon returned once more, bringing little news. The investigation had gone cold, and soon he admitted he'd likely be reassigned. Ray didn't argue. He saw it in Calderon's face. He was already halfway gone. The message was clear. No one was coming to finish the fight. If Ray wanted justice, he'd have to chase it alone. But his instincts had changed. He no longer trusted his surroundings, no longer trusted the thin line between being a man in control and a target in someone's crosshairs. So, when the hospital finally discharged him, he didn't go back to his apartment. He packed what little he had left, canceled his lease, and disappeared. He took up a new name, A new town and new rules. No corporate jobs, no big fish, no headlines. Just low-risk cases. Surveillance, cheating spouses, small lies. Lies that couldn't get him killed. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. He was hiding from them. Ray Mercer no longer introduced himself as Ray Mercer. In the small town where he eventually settled somewhere in rural Vermont, with more pine trees than people, he went by David Reed. It wasn't a perfect cover, just good enough to keep him off the radar. His new office sat above a bait shop, its front window covered in pale curtains and dust with a plastic open sign he often forgot to flip around. He took cases sparingly, mostly infidelity work or the occasional missing dog. The money wasn't great, but the danger was low. And for Ray, low was the point. He still had the scars. His jaw clicked when he ate, and his smile was permanently crooked, like it had been drawn on by someone in a hurry. The implants didn't quite match his old teeth, and his speech, though functional, had a slight hitch that reminded him daily of the price he paid. Most days, he didn't think about Norhurst or Vexler, or the hollow-eyed man who pulled the trigger. But some nights, the nightmares returned. The sound of shattering glass, the warmth of blood pooling under his tongue, the hiss of that damn tape recorder still rolling as his world went dark. Those nights, he'd sit up and stare out his window, half expecting headlights to sweep across his gravel driveway, a silhouette to step from the trees. But nothing ever came. Just the wind and the quiet and the long silence of unfinished business. After 6 or 7 months, Calderon called one last time. The investigation had been formally suspended. No leads, no progress, no justice. Ray thanked him, hung up, and stared at the phone long after the screen went black. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet resolve. The truth was simple: he'd gotten too close, and someone had tried to bury him for it. But he was still breathing. And in this line of work, that was a kind of victory. Maybe not the kind that came with applause or headlines, but the kind you learn to live with. Ray Mercer's story isn't just about corporate fraud or a failed assassination. It's a powerful reminder that truth, while vital, is often unwelcome in a world run by power and profit. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't lead to justice. Sometimes it gets you hurt. But the deeper message lies in what Ray chose to do. After the bullets he survived, he rebuilt. He didn't get revenge, but he didn't surrender who he was. In life, we all face moments where we must choose between comfort and conviction, between staying silent or speaking up. And those who speak up, those who chase truth, may find that the world doesn't applaud them for it. Still, there's dignity in survival. There's quiet strength in knowing you didn't fold. Ray's crooked smile, his silent resolve, are symbols of something we all need: resilience. You don't have to win loud to live well. Sometimes, walking away alive with your integrity intact is the greatest victory there is. Ever since Logan Pierce was a kid, he'd been obsessed with detective stories. Whether it was Sherlock Holmes or gritty crime dramas on late-night TV, the idea of chasing down secrets and piecing together puzzles hooked him early. So, when he graduated college with a degree in criminal justice, there was never any question about what came next. Becoming a licensed private investigator felt like the natural step forward. Logan applied with a small PI firm just outside Sacramento, where the owner not only mentored him through the state licensing process, but also got him properly insured and trained. He spent weeks learning surveillance basics, legal limits, and how not to get noticed while tailing someone through a crowded strip mall. Then, sooner than expected, a real case landed on his desk. A woman named Natalie Langford had hired the firm to follow her husband Derek, whom she suspected of cheating. It was supposed to be a basic job, just routine surveillance. Logan was nervous, sure, but excited too. It was his first shot at doing what he'd always dreamed of, and he didn't want to mess it up. Logan started his first assignment with a full tank of gas, a notebook, and a shaky mix of adrenaline and uncertainty. Derek Langford's routine, at first glance, was almost disappointingly normal. Each morning, Logan parked a block from Derek's downtown office and watched him stroll in with a coffee in hand. Nothing suspicious. Just a guy in a blue button-down heading into work like millions of others. Around noon, Derek would walk to the same sandwich shop on 8th Street, where Logan sat across the road with a black coffee, scribbling observations into his worn-out spiral pad. No odd detours, no secretive phone calls, no unexpected meetings, just turkey subs and small talk with coworkers. By the second day, Logan was tailing Derek's car at a respectful distance through post-work traffic, maintaining just enough space not to get spotted, still nothing out of the ordinary. By the third day, Logan felt almost comfortable. Surveillance, which had once seemed so exciting, now felt like a quiet waiting game. That evening, Derek headed to a bar on Jefferson Avenue, and Logan followed on foot, slipping onto a stool at the far end of the counter. He ordered a soda, kept Derek in the corner of his eye, and settled in for another long, uneventful night. But the comfort was short-lived. Things were about to change. That fourth evening started off like the others. Logan followed Derek to the same dimly lit bar on Jefferson, where the regulars nursed cheap beers and the jukebox played a low, lazy hum of country music. Logan took his usual place at the end of the bar, ordered a soda with lime, and settled in. Derek was with two friends laughing over pitchers and wings loud, but not unusual. Logan flipped his notebook shut. He wasn't going to get anything useful here. But then, around 11:00 p.m., Derek did something different. Instead of calling a rideshare or heading home in his usual direction, he staggered out the door alone and started walking fast. Logan tossed a few crumpled bills onto the bar and hurried after him. Downtown had emptied out by then. Logan followed from a block behind, past shuttered storefronts and flickering street lamps. Derek's pace was erratic, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, and Logan's instincts prickled. Something was off. Then Derek turned sharply into a narrow side street lined with old brick apartments and fenced-off lots. Logan hesitated but pushed forward, keeping to the opposite side of the street. That's when it happened. A hand shot out from the darkness and yanked him into an alley. The impact sent Logan crashing into a wall, scraping his shoulder through his jacket. Before he could react, a forearm pressed across his chest, pinning him. And then he saw it. Derek's face flushed and angry, just inches away. Logan could smell the stale beer on his breath and see the sharp glint of a knife held just below his ribs. Derek didn't say a word at first, just glared. Logan's heart pounded. Every training video he'd watched, every tip from his mentor vanished. All he could hear was his own blood rushing in his ears. Finally, Derek spoke calm, almost casual. "Who are you?" "Why have you been following me?" Logan lied. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just walking home." But Derek didn't buy it. His hand twitched, and Logan felt the cold bite of the blade pierce his shirt and slice skin. Not deep, but enough. Enough to send a surge of panic through his body. He gasped, clutched the wall, and saw a red stain blooming across his side. It was real now. All of it. Not a job, not a story. And Logan had no idea how this night would end. Logan's voice cracked as he confessed everything. There was no point pretending anymore, not with Derek's knife pressed against his stomach, and that wild glint in his eye. He blurted it all out in one breathless rush. He was a private investigator hired by Derek's wife, Natalie, who suspected him of cheating. The words spilled out before he could stop them, and with each syllable, Logan's shame deepened. He wasn't just caught, he'd failed, and worse, he had unknowingly put someone else in danger. Derek listened in eerie silence, then gave a low, humorless laugh. "Of course she did," he muttered. "She's always been nosy like that." Then his tone shifted. It turned colder. He leaned in again, the knife still poised, and said something Logan would never forget. "She won't leave me," he whispered. "Even if she knows. Because she knows what happens if she tries." Derek's calmness was more terrifying than if he had shouted. "She runs. I find her. I find her. I end her. Simple. Logan felt his stomach twist, not from the wound, but from the realization of what he'd just triggered. Derek stepped back, sheathed the knife, and smirked. "Thanks, detective," he sneered. "You just gave her a reason to bleed tonight." The sarcasm in his voice sliced deeper than the blade ever did. Derek turned and walked off into the dark, leaving Logan slumped against the brick wall, hand trembling over his wound, a dull ache spreading through his body. But it was nothing compared to the weight in his chest. The worst part wasn't the cut. It was the crushing guilt. Natalie had trusted him to help her. Instead, he'd armed her abuser with the knowledge and the excuse he needed to hurt her. And Logan knew he'd carry that burden a lot longer than any scar. Logan stumbled out of that alley with one hand pressed against his side and the other gripping the edge of his jacket, trying to hide the blood. The cut wasn't deep, nothing life-threatening, but the humiliation and guilt cut far deeper. He didn't go to the ER. He couldn't face a waiting room full of strangers or the inevitable questions. Instead, he went straight home, locked the door behind him, and didn't come out for a week. His small apartment became a prison. He barely ate. He didn't answer texts. He couldn't sleep without seeing Derek's face or hearing his voice. That mocking laugh echoed in his head, sometimes louder than his own thoughts. And worse than the fear was the guilt, the gnawing knowledge that he might have just signed Natalie's pain warrant with his cowardice and carelessness. He avoided mirrors because he hated the look on his own face. He'd dreamed of being a detective since he was a kid, had pictured himself as brave, capable, unshakable. But now, all he saw was a scared rookie who couldn't even protect the person who had trusted him. He thought about quitting, about walking away from it all, and taking a desk job somewhere safe, somewhere no one would bleed because of him. But something in him refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the belief that one screw-up, no matter how bad, shouldn't define a person forever. Maybe it was Natalie's face, imagined and afraid. Whatever it was, it pulled him out of bed. It got him showered. It helped him show up at the office a week later, exhausted but determined. He expected to be fired, but instead, his boss Raymond Halter just asked, "You okay?" The way he said it, no anger, just concern, knocked Logan off balance. He told Raymond everything. The tale, the alley, the knife. Raymond didn't flinch. He just nodded and said, "Bad things happen in this job, but you didn't make him a monster." Then he added, "If you need to walk away, I won't blame you." But Logan didn't walk away. He shook his head, clenched his jaw, and chose to stay, not because he was fearless, but because he'd finally learned what this job really costs, and he wasn't going to let that lesson go to waste. The alley never really left him. Even as Logan returned to work and slowly rebuilt his confidence that night, lingered in the corners of his mind, like a bruise that never fully faded. He took on smaller cases, at first runaway tenants, missing debtors, routine background checks, anything that didn't involve confrontation. He also started carrying a pocket knife, not to use it, but just to feel like he had some control if things ever went sideways again. It was a silent promise to himself, never be that vulnerable again. But something else changed too. Logan no longer saw his job as just gathering evidence or trailing suspects. He saw the weight behind every decision, the ripple effect of every word and action. He had learned the hard way that mistakes in his line of work didn't just cost a paycheck, they could cost people safety or worse. He still made mistakes, everyone does, but now he made them with his eyes wide open. Years later, even as his caseload grew and his instincts sharpened, Logan still thought about Natalie Langford. He never found out what happened to her, but every time he took on a new client, her name reminded him why he couldn't afford to take anyone's trust lightly again. Logan never became the kind of private investigator you read about in novels, the slick operator, the fearless pursuer, the guy who always gets the truth without breaking a sweat. He became something else, careful, quiet, watchful. The kind of investigator who knows that the shadows you walk into can sometimes stare back. That even a small lie, a single slip, can tear through a life like a blade through cotton. He never told another client's story without thinking of Natalie Langford, never tailed another suspect without checking his surroundings twice. And when he looked in the mirror now, he didn't see a coward anymore. He saw someone who had bled broken and still chose to stand back up. Because the truth is, this job isn't about catching cheaters or finding missing people. It's about carrying weight. Other people's fear, their doubt, their last sliver of hope. And sometimes that weight cuts deep. But if you're lucky, or maybe just stubborn enough, you learn how to carry it without letting it bury you. Stories like this are meant to leave a mark haunting, human, and unforgettable. To hear more just like it, go ahead and tap that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next drop. Every click, every comment, every share helps this channel grow and lets us keep digging into the strange and the real, one story at a time. Thanks for being here. The next case is coming soon, and it goes even deeper.